Yeah, I know. Okay, here we are in Ways and Means. It's still April 1st. And it is 10:45, and we are hearing from Bill Kimball. Hi, Bill. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Good morning. My name is Bill Kimball. I'm the superintendent of schools for Maple Run. I'm just making sure you're ready. I thought maybe I jumped the gun there.
No. The floor is yours. I'm so sorry. Charlie was just making a joke about your similar last names.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, we
Yes.
do, Charlie, but there's Representative Kimball, they're spelled differently. So yeah.
Yes, right, exactly. I ring you bounce, and Richard Kimball is a relative of yours, not mine, right?
Yeah, I get that a lot too. It's April
Yeah.
Fools. It's April Fools, so we need a few things today.
What about the America's Test Kitchen Milk Street guy?
Bill Kimball, that's a different guy, right?
It's a different guy. Yeah, I don't know.
Eric, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, the floor is yours, sir.
All right. Well, thank you. As I stated, my name is Bill Kimball. I'm the superintendent of schools for Maple Run. I've been the superintendent here for the past 5 years and working in the district for the past 7. Prior to that, I've been an administrator / teacher for the past 33 years, and I've served 3 other supervisory unions / districts through the before and through the Act 46 process. I thought I'd give some context a little bit to Maple Run, and I know that you're taking testimony on tax incentives and other ways to support mergers. I was present for about half of the previous testimony that you had from Brooke Olson Farrell. In Maple Run, we were one of the first districts to merge in Vermont under Act 46. And one of the main reasons that drove Maple Run with that was the tax incentives at that time. That was a big incentive for our community. And to kind of give you some data on that, the year before we merged in fiscal year 2017, we had a tax rate of $1.45. And for the 8 years after, so the tax incentives went for 5 years, but for the first 8 years, our taxes never rose above that $1.45. Our community still asks today for us to prove that there was actually a savings in money. And I didn't bring the graph today, but I'd be glad to share it with the committee. When you take into account the impact of inflation and level it to 2024 dollars, we've almost had a 20-cent tax decrease during that time. So for Maple Run, that's one every budget cycle someone comes forward and asks me to show that slide, so I kind of keep that in my back pocket. And the thing that has happened is our tax rate has escalated fast and very rapidly for our area. We serve St. Albans City, Town, and Fairfield, and the county of Fairfield, along with the city and town of St. Albans, is growing very rapidly. So our CLA is really impacting our tax rates. The other thing that I would tell you that about our merger that made it really successful was an investment in we call it our small school. It's actually probably one of the largest schools in Vermont. I actually keep data on this where our smallest school is Fairfield Center School, which serves about 250 students, and our other schools in Maple Run, St. Albans City is about almost 600 students. St. Albans Town is a little over 700, and BFA St. Albans, our high school, is at 930 students. So while my history is working in small rural schools, that's what I've done a lot of in my career. And before coming here, the largest elementary would have been smaller than Fairfield. They're like the 70th largest school in the state. So there's a lot more that are smaller. In saying that, we know today, and we've talked with our board about it, that we could take all the students that are in Fairfield and put them in the St. Albans City and Town, but it's politically untenable for us to do that. And under the current place we are. So when I look at tax incentives, that was something that really helped us in Act 46. One of the other issues that we're trying to tackle in Maple Run is our structure. We have 3 pre-K-8 schools, St. Albans City, St. Albans Town, and Fairfield. And so we service all those grade levels in all those schools. We've been asking the question, is that the best way to serve students? And one of the things that's enticing to think about that's in Act 73 is having comprehensive high schools and bigger middle schools. If we were to move to taking one of our larger schools and making it our middle school, there would be considerable construction costs, not to increase the footprint, but renovation to make it a high quality middle school. So when I think about reconfiguration, that's talked about in Act 73 and trying to serve all our students, that's something that we'd have to look to find those resources to reconfigure that school building, because half the building is a primary/intermediate elementary school, and the space needs and the needs of the student are much different than students that are in grades 5 through 8. So that's one of the things, as you think about incentives, I would urge the Ways and Means to think about construction first.
Indeed.
And I know you've taken testimony on that. So that's one of the places that I'm in agreement for where we are right now. The other thing is for high schools. This is my career, as I told you my length. It's the first time I've worked in a high school that has a tech center on the same campus. And one of the things that I would say, this is my first experience in working in a comprehensive high school, as outlined in Act 73, but just in general, we are able to merge our schedules we have our schedules aligned between the tech center and BFA St. Albans, and students easily flow in and out of 2 periods of a tech center course and back into the high school. Our highest performing kids are accessing the tech center. We have waiting lists for almost every program. And unfortunately, we're literally land bound. We can't find the space we need because we need to expand the tech center to offer more opportunities to kids. So that's one of the things that when I think about construction and those comprehensive high schools, it's having that modern learning space to meet students' needs.
Anything else you want to tell us about what worked or what you would?
The other thing that worked was
What
our
didn't?
community bought into the merger. And so it really helped the cultural change that we needed to have to think of us as Maple Run. I'll just give you a little anecdote. This past December, we had a meeting of all the Franklin County representatives and all the school boards in Franklin County. One of my 2 representatives from Fairfield said right in front of everyone, like, I was against this merger. But when it works right, I can see that actually the town of Fairfield and the school of Fairfield Center School has gained more from the merger because resources came in from the other towns to actually do sorely needed renovations and upkeep that were due to not doing long-term maintenance and deferred maintenance issues. And so we've put almost over $4 million into that school without having to bond a penny of it. And that's been and I think that sums up our experience. But it was the cultural buy-in to the merger. I'm hopeful of what the House Education's been working on about trying to have communities come in and see what the evidence is, because that community support has stead us well here in St. Albans.
Bill, I say this as a graduate of St. Albans City Elementary School, but do you think that your school districts were really positioned in a place to merge more easily than, say, some of the other communities we might hear from a forced merger standpoint? So at that point, it was really just the outstanding financial benefit that was in question?
I would actually say the opposite. We had long-standing before I got here, and the superintendent prior to me, Dr. Dearth, he did a great job of just literally getting, and along with some strong leadership of the board, I kind of shortcut this part of the testimony, but there was strong leadership from the board and himself to get everyone in the same room. And prior to merging in Franklin Central, there were long-standing relationships between principals and boards and not the superintendent. So there was a lot of groundwork that had to be done, and there were strong leaders on the board and in the community that said this needed to happen, but it wasn't in the culture of the schools. The schools were very separated, and we're still working on curriculum instruction and assessment work right now. It took us 3 to 4 years just to get the human human resources, businesses, and IT. And that's the other thing I would say is that I worry about the timeline when we're going to take. We were all within the same supervisory union, so at least we all had the same financial platform for technology. When we're going to start talking about in between different supervisory unions slash school districts, I think of just my neighbors, and I know they're on different software platforms for financial. So when we
Yeah.
talk about just trying to merge the payroll with different contracts, that's going to be exponentially, in my mind, more complex than doing it within a supervisory union that came together.
All right, thank you for that. You know, as one of your representatives from, well, Representative Dickinson was on the school board at the time that BFA went public instead of its private status. And that was a huge process as well, as I recall.
It was, and that was getting everyone on that idea of the public. And then it was a huge process. We didn't have merged contracts before the merger to Maple Run. So just getting all the contracts the same was a huge undertaking. And it wasn't so much from I think I can say this for my association colleagues. It was a harder undertaking from the associations because there were 4 separate associations and they had different agreements for how they did work.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, Representative Benny, and then Odie.
Okay, can you tell us more about what happened with the contracts themselves? I suspect you had Fairfield on one end and maybe BFA on the other. Are they all getting the same step increases at this point? And
Well, yeah, as soon as the contract was merged back in 2018, they all had to be what we call lift up and place down. So we had to put them in the same place. And everyone BFA was the highest paying at that point, and everyone came up to BFA. There was nothing found mid-range. And I will say, I can tell you for our current contract that we're under, we have one of the higher salary scales in all of Vermont for base salary. Our index isn't, but I said that wrong. I'm sorry. Our base salary is one of the highest in Vermont. Our index is not. And then working conditions had to be figured out, and we're still living that reality today between buildings, because some staff have been here for 30 plus years.
were you able to let any staff go? I mean, reduce positions?
Yeah, we have been. We've been able to reduce positions through attrition. We've had a few reductions in force, but our main way of doing that, we were able to do support staff as in business. We had separate business accounting for every district, so that was a huge, we've been able to streamline that. I know that our current administrative central office is about 4% of the budget for all of Maple Run. And so we were able to really streamline that for HR, IT, and business operations. And then we've also been able to streamline some teaching positions. We're at the point, because of our size, it's easier to do that with attrition. And a year and a half ago, the board adopted our second version of our class size policy, and that's really helped us really try to look at class sizes. We're starting to see, for the first time since the merger, we're starting to see a loss of students in St. Albans. We've been really flat for the past 8 years.
Did I ever tell you that I used to work in Fairfield? I worked there for years and so I have a lot of friends still up there.
Yeah.
In the school, and so I know from their mouths, they are much happier now as they're part of a larger district. They feel like their children, well, it's their grandchildren at this point, but are getting more opportunity. I think things are going much better, and certainly the facility, they could afford to improve that facility. It was needed greatly. When I was there, we had 3 schools: East Fairfield, Center School, and and the 2 schools side by side, one, 2, and then the school out in East Fairfield. So it was a lot of buildings to maintain, and I think pretty much that's gone. So
Yeah.
good job.
Well, thank you. I would tell you that one of the things I've been studying this year is return on investment. What are we getting for student performance for the money that we're putting in? And our highest return on investment right now is Fairfield Center School. And that's mainly due to class size and student need. While they have they have the same intensity of some of our other schools for student need, it's not as varied. It's not the same percentage, I should say, as the other schools. And their class sizes are right in that sweet spot from grades 4 through 12, range from 18 to 26. And their class sizes K through 3 are in the high teens. And so that's really driving and it's our highest performing pre-K as well.
Great, glad to hear it.
Did you, I heard that you have waiting list for your, technical center. And then you mentioned first and, students go in the middle 2 periods of the day, so you have the first and last periods. Where teachers aren't teaching, so if that's correct, so are the teachers, do they have a lesser teaching load if they're teaching at the technical center? If so.
Yeah, so let me clear that up a little bit. We have a half-day technical center that runs the same bell-to-bell time as the high school. And so we have a morning session for the technical center and an afternoon technical session, and then we have an exploratory / pre-tech period, which is our 4th period or middle of the day. Our tech center teachers are teaching the same load as our high school. They have 5 periods of classes. That's what our contract calls for out of 7. What happens is a student can elect. Let me give you an example of a student from 7 years ago that I know really well. He's actually graduated from Georgia Tech now. He's an engineer. He knew that engineering and STEM was a real passion of his. So his sophomore year, he spent his year in our engineering studies tech center. So he took 2 classes of a 7-period day in the tech center. And then the other 5 periods he took for other classes. By the time he graduated, he had done BC calculus, which we're able to offer 1 period of that. And I think he had probably about 9 to 10 AP courses, along with an independent study and technical and engineering studies, because it was past what the tech center normally does. So those are another really stellar program. We have a couple other stellar programs that I would just mention. We've been able to combine geometry and construction. So for kids that need a real hands-on application math course, we have a huge waiting list for that. We could have 3 or 4 sections of that where a math teacher teams up with the construction teacher in the tech center, and they teach geometry to sophomores, and our kids love it. And then the other one is our health sciences. There's a waiting list for that, and they end up with usually 15 college credits by the time they end their 2 years in health sciences in the technical center. And at the same time, they're going back to BFA and taking AP Bio, AP Chem, things like that. Our construction trades right now, we are able to have 4 sections of it, which serves approximately 45 to 50 kids. We could have 100 kids in that program. That's how popular it is.
I get it, but can I ask one last question? If you have the building and you have the teachers teaching 5 classes, then is that the 5 out of 7?
Yeah, it's 5 hours. They teach 5 out of 7. in the tech center.
Why not add teachers and then teach in that same space, the 2 more periods today to take up the fulfill the demand?
It's the schedule that we need for the tech center to meet the requirements for the technical, for the tech ed requirements. So you can't split it. You need a back-to-back period. It's a whole scheduling piece. So we have to leave those. It's a constant requirements under technical education. I'd have to get my director for the tech center to come in and give you more of those details on why that is.
Thank you very much. Bill, has there been any analysis done of whether the merger saved money overall? I know that we've talked about this at the state level, and the data is a little bit unclear about whether ongoing operating costs really went down as a result. I know that wasn't necessarily the reason for doing a merger, but do you have any analysis on that?
I don't have any analysis. I will tell you one of the things that we do get asked at budget time is, that the question you just asked, like, where's the actual savings, the dollar savings? And there's none that I could point to. What I could point to is, I know in 21, 22 and 22, 23, the board debated about whether, because we had the room in the tax rate, whether to expand offerings and supports to kids. As we all know, mental health has been a really huge issue for our students, and that's something that we've invested in heavily in St. Albans. We've brought a whole behavioral mental health division on within the school system, where we're providing a lot of supports to kids, and we're finding that really successful in our social emotional data and our behavioral data for our students. But we've had to bring in a lot of resources to do it. So we've actually, that's where our expansion has been, where we probably could have cut that cost. And that was a decision the board made at the time.
And Bill, where is your per pupil spending just like relationally to the rest of the state? Like, I don't need anything exact, just like middle of the pack.
No,
upper
we're
third?
we're in the top third right now. I know next year we're going down quite a bit. It's one of the things the board asked us to readjust. And one of the reason that that's being readjusted is we've had some revenues increase that we weren't expecting. So outside the ed fund.
Like what?
Special ed revenue has really gone up for us. We have had a real spike in special ed spending, especially kids on high intensity needs. We've created our own special ed programs. We now have 3 alternative programs that we're running within the district for kids because we can't find the outside services. And that's actually cut costs, but we seem to be increasing that population exponentially. So we're able to take that from money that we would have had, that would have come from the ed. I mean, it's all coming from the ed fund, but through special ed instead of through the other per pupil. So I can tell you right now, this current year, we're at 15,000, just about $15,000 per long-term weighted average student. And next year will be about 14,600, which will, in the projection of the data that was just gathered from past budgets, will be about middle of the road.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today and all you're doing.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
I think I decided if we should go back to John or jump to Julia. I think we're gonna go to Julia. Great, then we'll go to John.
Okay.
When we were last here with John, which was, I think, just an hour ago.
Yeah.
Hello again. What's your name?
Hey,
Oh, thanks for calling us.
Office of Legislative Counsel. We had actually largely wrapped up the statutory text that I wanted to show you. So what I might do now is, you may have already seen, but I have a slide deck with some resources, and I wanted to tee up some policy questions related to any tax incentives you might be considering.
And before I just want to sort of on the phantom pupil conversation. We saw a lot of districts have like fairly significant tax impacts from large magnitude changes in the number of pupils. Weighted pupils, not necessarily a large number of weighted pupils, but with a small school population, a few students can make a really huge difference, and a few students change in their weights can make a huge difference. That has less of an impact in a larger district. And it's something that we might want to think about as we're moving forward with this. Just how we equate all of that, and then also how we actually count the students and making sure that that's accurate is also a piece of that puzzle. Do you have your, yeah, did you keep your hand or not? Which way?
This year is actually very significant swings in student counts in bigger districts. And so it wouldn't just be, it would be protecting Cary and Springfields and Bennington's.
I did this really quickly, so you got a calculator? Mainly, this is just a set of resources. The first thing that I wanted to note is that people talk about the tax incentives in Act 46, but these actually predate and in Act 46 were contemplated together with previous acts, including in 2010 and 2012. The same structure of 10 cents, 8 cents, 6 cents, and so on was provided in Act 153 of 2010 as part of an effort, earlier efforts to incentivize mergers. And one of the incentives proposed in 2012 as part of Act 156 was that alternative options were extended to what are called regional education districts. And basically those districts could choose whether to receive the tax incentive discount, or instead they could receive a one-time grant, $400 per pupil. So they were given a choice basically between tax incentives or some kind of grant. I don't know much about that, just flagging that these are kind of predecessor acts that predate Act 46 and set up some of the measures there and are maybe a place to take a look. We've talked through basically all of this, but I did want you to see the set of resources. So just to reorient what we talked about this morning, Act 46 set out those tiered tax incentives. If you were in the accelerated merger group, you received a longer period with a first fiscal year discount of 10 cents. And then you were capped at those 5% swings. Technically for the accelerated group, there's only a 5% cap on increases, not on decreases. But for the other less preferred governance structures, you had a shorter time period beginning with an 8-cent discount, and you had a 5% cap on both increases and swings. Sections 22 through 25 spoke to that phantom pupil piece. We talked about the yield bill from 2016. This was the section that expanded the issues related to the calculation of tax rates and raised the concern around divorcing education spending decisions from folks' tax rates by including that 5% cap. And so part of that act was tasking the AOE with reporting on the calculation of tax rates. You can see the links to those reports here. The piece that I linked to before is the first of these, the report on tax rates for member towns of unified union districts. I did want to note there are a couple of acts that followed this that touched on the tax incentive pieces. So in 2017, Act 49 extended the incentives to supervisory unions that were not supervisory districts. So previously it had been exclusively available to supervisory districts, so a single district, right? And then it was made available to supervisory unions, so a number of districts within. And then there's some technical measures related to how to calculate tax rates for certain school districts. I can pull any of these up, but don't especially know much to say about them. Just noting that as part of the cleanup efforts after Act 46, there are a number of times that the legislature needed to clarify how the rates were calculated, because it was not extremely clear from the Act 46 measures. And then especially clarify to whom the incentives are extended. And then Act 73 from 2017, we looked at earlier. This was tracking the recommendations of AOE's report on tax rates and included that tax rate reduction review. If you recall, that was if you're increasing, you get the 5% plus the gap between your ed spending per pupil and inflation, which was 4%. So you could get, in the hypothetical we saw, you could increase a maximum increase of 8%. The idea was to expose folks more to their ed spending decisions if they were spending above inflation, basically. And those were consistent with the tax rate report from the Agency of Education.
The third bullet point, return
Yes.
taxes from member towns, is that the one that you showed us earlier?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Exactly. And that is a good one to look at. It's quite clear and the last piece I wanted to flag, mainly this is just a set of resources, but things that came up to me and have come up in discussion this morning. One thing you want to ask if you're considering these sorts of things, what are the eligibility conditions for receiving a tax incentive? This is what I glossed over in subsection A of Act 46, Section 6, where I said you need to get kicked in. And if you recall, I talked about how certain preferred governance structures receive the tax incentives. So one question here would be what actually kicks you into the tax incentive bucket? And I know that there's contemplation for tax penalties as well. So if that's the consideration, what puts you in that camp? Another big consideration is on what timeline. This would need to be figured out either in conjunction with or replacing any existing transitionary measures. You'll recall that Act 73 did set out a number of transitionary measures, including a homestead tax rate transition that occurs across under the timeline contemplated there, fiscal years 29 through 2033. It differs fully transition in FY 2033. If you provide any sort of incentives, we would probably need to resolve, to my mind, at least like 4 different camps. If you merge in advance of the transition, if you merge during transition, how does that interact with the transition? If you merge after the transition, if you didn't merge, there are penalties. So there may be simple language that encompasses that. It's just that we would need to think about how any incentive measures interact with those transitions, which, just to remind you guys, the way that it works in Act 73 is you identify the gap between a school district's FY 28 ed spending, the rate it would have in FY 28, and the rate it would have in FY 29 under the new uniform statewide rate. You prorate that difference over a 5-year period to roll out the transition. But just how does the incentive interact with the timeline? Kind of talked about in 3 as well. The measures that were included in Act 46 that we saw talked about that 5% transition. And we talked about some of the issues that arose as a result of that. I would think about too, what sort of, if we could anticipate any unintended consequences that a cent discount might lead to. This was foregrounded by the tax rate reduction review, which was in response to the way in which school districts were insulated from their decisions within their homestead rate. Like I talked about before, that's maybe less of a concern in this particular case. If you're moving to a foundation formula with a uniform statewide rate, folks are no longer internalizing that decision through a budget vote for ed spending. But I'm sure that there are other kinds of consequences that we just thought about. And then I just wondered too, what is the difference? How does the change from locally varying homestead rates based on local spending decisions to uniform statewide rate affect the incentive effects of a cent discount? Does it mean more in our current system because it directly plays into how you can budget? Or is it just generally that people love to have a discount on their tax rates and it doesn't matter what funding formula you have? So just things to think about.
And then a few more that I would add in there are incentives paid for out of the same pot as everything else. So are they functionally creating disincentives for other people, and how transparent do we make the disincentives while communicating the incentives? And then I'm sorry if you said this 5 minutes ago, John, when are the 127 tax rates finished?
Is that 27? Is it in FY 27? Do you recall whether the?
Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yep.
Anyone else have any questions for John on this? Look at you.
Very cool.
Is there a calculator on the first slide?
There sure was.
Full circle moment, John Green.
I don't know why I tried to do that, but I'd like to have
Can
it.
you bring the?
Yes, sorry. I was so embarrassed by my preference.
Julia?
Hi, Julie Ricer today about the Act 127, well, technically Act 84, the penny discounts are the last year of them existing is FY 20.
25.
9,
FY 29.
FY 29.
So the first year was FY 25.
And this year that starts in July is FY 27. Something
But
better.
of course, because they're decreasing over time. School districts are phasing out over time, so not all school districts will be experiencing the penny discounts through FY 23.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Will you go to the one with the questions? Thank you.
Oh.
No, the policy questions one. That
So
one.
excited to show the cats.
Anyone have any other pieces they want to throw on here? Questions about this? Okay, great.
So what,
Yeah.
the merger incentive grants,
60.
not just the discount and the tax rate, but which is the one that actually had money? You said there was a $400 per student,
Yeah.
is that it?
If you look at the 2012 Act, I think it's 156.
Yeah.
And I could pull it up if you would like me to. It's in section 13 of that act.
I'm just wondering, you won't know, John, I don't think, as to what the impact was, as to what behavior did it actually result in?
I don't know. I just noted it as something I was not used to seeing. It stood out to me as a unique structure.
Just a general high level thought, it's hard to even know if these incentives are relevant because the 3 districts that we're hearing from today are all qualitatively different from the districts that chose not to merge on under Act 46. So I wonder, I mean, I'll be very interested to see what House Ed gives to us because until we're clear about what they think they're doing, it's hard to evaluate whether these incentives are motivational.
We're hearing from Mount Abe Unified School District.
They're all 3 operating districts with the exception of Orwell. And the issue is around the areas, the small districts are overwhelmingly school choice districts now, and they're also all overwhelmingly small and they're interspersed. So merging there is a very different project than merging in Slate Valley, Addison County, and Franklin County.
Are there districts that you would like to hear from that we should add to the agenda? Because I've added everyone to the agenda we've invited everyone to testify that was sent.
I mean, again, my understanding is that we're trying to develop funding policy that is responsive to the recommendations of Health Ed, and they're still like changing things with the action as we speak. So I'm just trying to figure that out. I just think that, and again, anytime you do tax incentives on top of a funding formula that may be inappropriately weighted, you're actually potentially not doing what you think you're doing. So I just think that it's just unclear to me that any of those incentives are going to address, I think ad nauseam said that if you're overweighting a town that is tuitioning all its kids to a neighbor, there is absolutely zero incentive for them to ever merge because there'll always be lower costs if they're not merged. So there will be lower costs, there'll be lower tax rate, even if they're more costly.
So are there other districts that you would like to hear from and
I mean, I
testify?
can come up with recommendations. Yeah, I mean, you could get someone like Elaine, from North, from, Elaine Collins, heard and talking about Derby and Holland. 2 great examples.
Okay, so we invited the folks that were sort of on the list. A couple of them didn't want to come.
Morgan
but-
and Jersey.
And Morgan,
Yeah.
Morgan
and all.
and Holland tuition all their kids to Derby. As they match those graduates. And it's just a way to see what it looks like.
And we may have to just settle with the fact that we may end up with some cases like that. But if we can do it with most of the state, I mean, and the bottom line is you gotta make the voters happy. If Morgan and Holland and whoever else doesn't want to merge, they want to keep life the way it is, then who are we to say, no, you can't? I mean, if they want to stay that way, we have to cope with that. It's like right now, they vote on their budget, they send us the amount they voted, and we have to raise the money. And then, you know, the tax. It's it's a system they're voting against, so we've got to fix the system. I think I told you this before, I mean, I honestly don't believe that these communities that are perpetually voting their budgets down year after year, I don't believe that all of a sudden Vermonters think that education isn't important and that they shouldn't fund it.
No, and I think we heard that from folks in Slate Valley. I think Teddy talked about that. Oh, thank you, John.
Certainly. Just not forget, also just we also heard from Slate Valley that. Not that it wasn't a factor, but that the tax incentive was not the main driver for the merger. So I think that's also about like, all of those policy questions are how incentives should or should not be structured and the consequences of those. There's also, I think, a conversation we need to have about what the point is of actually doing this.
I was thinking that, when Representative Brady came here and talked about, someone to facilitate things. I thought that was helpful, and I also thought that, one of the witnesses talked about Maple. Talked about, instead of an alignment of superintendent, school district principal and school board, when the school board aligned more with superintendent, then there was a bigger overview of the whole system. So that was helpful.
Representative Holcomb?
I just want to uplift what Teddy said, because in my experience, I mean, I was part of a merger 100 years ago, and we merged 4 districts, closed 2 schools, and built a new one. We couldn't have done it without construction aid. It was not about tax incentives. It was 100% about construction aid. And when we had that, we were able to manage costs to bring them down. So since
That is the perfect segue, because I want to spend the next 20 minutes in this room with folks' takeaways from yesterday. Right, that was yesterday? Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah, of course.
I thought it was interesting listening to the different areas. Having lived in Northern Virginia for a number of years, I'm a little bit familiar with Prince George's County.
Mhm.
It's different from Vermont.
I don't know if Mark can hear you.
Yeah, speak up just a little bit, please.
Or face that way.
I was just saying, having lived in Northern Virginia for a number of years, a little bit familiar with Prince George's County. It is, as our guide on the screen yesterday said, it is a lot different than Vermont. Just as Rhode Island system is different from Vermont. It would be nice if we could look at, I know we're probably have time constraints, but it would be nice if we could look at something within the New England area, maybe New Hampshire.
You know, Rhode Island is part of the.
Well, yes, but I mean, it is.
I'm just teasing you, I'm teasing you, I'm sorry.
It is quite a different state.
Yeah. I know this is very like an un-Vermont thing to say. I find West Virginia actually a really helpful comparison case. Population wise, geography, the way they manage and don't manage local control. Very different politically, but a lot of the issues of scale, I think, are more relevant in West Virginia than, you know, Massachusetts has like a city. No offense to Burlington.
We are rural, by the way.
That's just.
Governor.
No, I appreciate
Not the governor, but the federal government.
I will say, I looked around for folks to testify on school construction and talked to Michael Gahn, who we, have talked to a few times about Maine. And the issue is that Maine hasn't figured it out either. So there was just an article like a couple weeks ago about how like out of 100 applications for school construction funding under their program, 2 got approved for this year for some school construction. And so I think a lot of us in New England are struggling with it. New York, it keeps coming up as the one that's building all the schools, but again, like totally different in terms of scale and money and number of people and all of that. It's hard to find a direct comparison that's really figured out something that we can learn from.
The other thing is Wyoming, you talked about it, transportation. As far as population wise, it kind of fits what Vermont is, and it is widespread areas. That might be another area.
My concern about Wyoming is, I mean, as somebody said to me, worked in telecom, somebody took Vermont's population in a butter knife and spread it out, a person per square mile, whereas I think there are gaps in Wyoming, so they don't have a dispersed population that we do, which creates a unique town. One of the things that came out of all the testimonies yesterday, it felt like, was some sense that, you know, we're in a universe with finite resources, but it did seem like this place where it made the biggest impact was at the high school level.
Is the what level?
People talked about, I mean, when Marilyn talked about some of its unique needs, they talked about high school being a place where you can make a bigger impact quickly. And then the other point was that scale is important to the viability of some of these interesting alternatives, the scale and density to some of the funding schemes that people are talking about.
I'm taking notes, not writing emails, just thinking.
You're looking at me, so I guess I need to,
Mhm.
that's okay. Yeah, it was interesting because what I heard yesterday was that middle schools and elementary schools are a little bit easier to build numbers of them. And that high schools are more complicated and more expensive and have different needs in different areas. And so it's harder to think about a program that has like sort of more standardized plans and more standardized programming and more standardized funding for high schools because they're different regionally and have different needs. That's what I heard from that, but
Well, I think it's hard to just like the Prince George's County is really hard to untangle as relevant because it's a county, it's not a state, and it's very high density. So they have specialized programs. So when they're done in their high schools, they're close enough and probably now like 400 square miles for 18 times up. They're able to distribute programs across schools that all kids still have access to. So it's a different proposition. I think I meant that, that if you can do a few projects, but yeah, I hear you. It's just, it's the idea of bidding out projects all over the state with one company, the efficiencies of that just aren't there, is what I meant to say. Because for us, it's, you know, 3 schools in Prince George's County is not the same as a school in the Northeast Kingdom, school in Arlo, school in
Why not?
because it's just, you don't get my guess is you don't get the operation efficiencies of being,
The contractor's operational efficiency?
maybe, I would assume so. But maybe we can
I think that's- I think
test
that's a
that proposition, I just don't know.
I thought I heard that you do get that yesterday in the testimony.
Well, what I'm trying to say is they're dense. He said they had it because they could do it, they could have, what do they call it, swing schools, they could move people, they could manage the projects regionally in a tight way, to swing people so that they could take an entire building offline and then stagger the next one, stagger the next one. That's just much harder to do when you're closing a school in one place and then someplace else.
And other bases.
You end up in Macy's,
What has a
not everyone has a
I
Macy's.
think no one has a Macy's anymore, as a matter of fact. Representative Wazazek.
Thank you. Sticking on the theme of Prince George's County, I thought one thing that really stuck out to me was when they talked about building in the system refreshes after 20 years into those contracts. Because I think what we've heard from in a glib way, everyone and their mother about our current house stock of schools is the amount of not just need to, you know, build new buildings if we're going to go to regionalized high schools, et cetera, but the amount of deferred maintenance that's been done. So as much as we can plan for and build in mechanisms like that up front, so that, you know, this body is not faced with this same problem 30 to 50 years from now, I think would be very helpful. And I don't know how you exactly legislate that, but interesting. way-
There is I think there's something about the reserve guidance language.
Right.
One of the things that stuck with me, and I'm trying to like find my way through it, is I think the treasurer and Rhode Island talked about the sort of a rating system for how much aid a district gets.
Yeah.
And that has a lot of overlap with the system we created for supplemental district spending. And that there's like something in how those two things line up that's useful, but I haven't like quite closed my Venn diagram yet inside my mind. Bridget and then Mark.
Mine is sort of going back to the reason for, Teddy's thought about that, and well, not Teddy's thought about it, but the reason I think we haven't maintained schools particularly well was something that Rhode Island said, which is we were really cautious to make sure that construction wasn't competing with programming. These were two separate funding systems and structures, so that you're not having to choose between teachers and maintenance, because that's what's happened in Vermont for years and years. Is every year you get to budget season and you're trying to choose whether to, spend $400,000 to put on a new roof someplace or keep 4 teachers.
Yeah.
And usually people make the choice to keep the 4 teachers, which is not necessarily a bad choice, but we've just set up the system in that way that those choices are competing.
Mark.
I think we heard too, as far as some of what you were talking about, that, rehabbing, school buildings is a whole lot cheaper than building new ones. And with that, I go back to, I believe it was projected that the cost for, from the task force or the group that looked at deferred maintenance was $300 million a year. And we just heard from the bonding folks that they have the capacity for 50 million, possibly 100 million.
Right.
So, I just have a real concern with, where are we gonna get the money? We're gonna run out rather rapidly with that sort of projection. Anyway.
I'm gonna add on to that concern because I'm nervous that if we jump into this with like a let's just spend what we have mentality, then we're gonna create more disparities around the state than we already have now if we're not careful about it. So if we can't do it all, we need to be really careful about what the sum looks like.
And I think it was Rhode Island too, didn't they say that they initially started out with a proposal to kind of have a rating, but then they threw that out? There you go. I mean, that's totally unrealistic.
Oh, I was just gonna, a few things. I mean, Prince George's County was most interesting because it just had that different model. And to Rebecca's point, I don't know if it's, you could just do it again here, but my questioning of each candidate, person giving testimony was how are you paying for it? And it was all mostly general fund money. Except when we came to Rhode Island, the state's providing assistance based on what the school district can't come up with on their own. So they don't have statewide education funds like we do. So it's kind of, we're an apple and they're all oranges in some way. So it's like, it's hard to make that comparison. But I thought it was compelling to think of, there's additional room in the state's ability to bond for more money. That we could use some of that as grants to different school districts as part of their construction, as long as they're necessity or, school by necessity. And then also provide some kind of funding formula for what that debt is on an ongoing basis and using that from a different source. Again, as long as it meets that definition. So it's part grant, part subsidy, depending on the qualifications of the district area. I thought that might be an interesting mix. So that's in my head.
Oh, Jim, sorry.
Thanks. There were a couple of parts that I thought were really fascinating, particularly if we have to build new schools in different places that, as part of mergers. There were 3 things that were discussed, pretty articulately, I thought. One was public-private partnerships. That's something new. We don't do that. We could look into that. Another one is the land bank idea. I mean, those things fit together potentially quite nicely and could involve other committees, I'm sure, but it's a fascinating area to kind of scope out on a whiteboard or somewhere or something like that.
I'll go back to something Charlie said, because I had a conversation yesterday evening. It was an offhand conversation, a full conversation. It was an offhand remark from the chair of corrections and institutions. who this all used to fall under the capital bill, right? And her concern was, and told me to ask the question really, and it's probably more of a legal counsel question that we need to dig into a little bit, about whether it was actually legal for us to be using general obligation bonds to provide grant funding. Because she said that she had run into that previously when they were working on this years and years ago.
Oh.
And so I just wanted to surface that as something that needs a little bit more research to understand like how that would work. And what the impact would be if, you know, on our credit rating, if we're issuing general obligation bonds that are then being used for grants to reimburse districts for their debt service.
Interesting.
I will make sure the treasurer's office gets that question. Thanks.
I'm also wondering with the construction requirements that'll be coming up. Are we gonna be doing, well, I mean, as we do this transformation under 73, we're gonna need new schools.
Other requirements for school construction. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Are we gonna do it all at once? Or are we gonna prioritize one area over another? Just how is that going to be planned out?
So in Act 73, there's a prioritization criteria that came from two task forces that happened before 73. And then that was handed off to the school.
Stated for School Construction Advisory Board.
Yes. And there's rulemaking that's supposed to come from there that has not happened yet, that should be developing that. But I think there's still an open question of, will they, even with all those guidelines and prioritizations, are they gonna be approving more than we have capacity to fund, and what happens then?
It also may get down to fairness.
Yeah.
Urban versus
Yeah.
rural areas.
Woodstock versus Newport.
And so I think it would be.
Yeah, I guess that, seriously, yeah.
And so I think it's helpful for like, if you have that question, if we all have that question, to look at the prioritization criteria that's sort of the statutory intent that's supposed to guide rulemaking, and make sure it is as comprehensive as we need it to be.
How do we balance our aspirations with the realities? I mean, I'm worried that we're lacking in some significant timelines and there's a lot of assumptions around pacing. We already don't seem to have enough labor in the state to build the housing we think we want. You know, we're talking about bringing in a bunch of school projects. How are we gonna make this all work? Do we even have the labor and businesses in the state to do this work? Is this going to be competing with other projects? What's the impact on that cost? What's the impact of what's happening at the national level on cost? And I'm just wondering how we negotiate that while also trying to achieve some of the stated intentions of the funding transition we're talking about.
You know, that was interesting when we had Scott Baker in the chair, we're talking about what did the current national events have an impact on? He says really about the level of need more than anything else. But he also said there's 192 million, I think, in approved but unadvanced bonds because of the projects are delayed for whatever reason. And then measuring that against what Burlington had was the amount of out of state labor to do the construction was, I think, 40% of their labor force. So it's really interesting to look at that. So they figured out a way to get it done. And the concept of the P3 coming in and doing is they would bring their own labor with them, or they would exhaust what labor supply that was here and then supplement it. It was some concept like that. I don't know, there's good concern because what does that mean? But there's got to be a way to pencil it together.
And I heard, I think Michael's gone, and the person from Sturgis County both talk about doing this at scale means that we're sort of creating enough of a need for this that we're able to sort of turn the curve on labor issues.
Yeah, I think I walked away a little confused about exactly what our bonding capacity is, because of what you were saying, Charlie, that Scott Baker had said about part of the way they're assessing what bonding capacity is based on how many projects there are that can actually take it up. It's like a little bit of a chicken and egg thing, and talking about a lot of projects that could. take it up. And so I didn't get a perfect sense of just how much capacity there would be if there were projects to take it up.
What I heard him explaining was that there's sort of authorized, there's like three buckets. There's like, these is not the right words, and maybe John should be answering this question, not me, but there's sort of, in my interpretation of the words, there's like projects that are authorized and the money is flowing. There's projects that are authorized and the money is not flowing yet. And then there's debt capacity that's been like, that the state could afford and keep its bond rating that has not been authorized nor spent. And it was sort of that third bucket that were somewhere between 50 and $100 million a year. But I think they can't give us a definite answer because they cannot imagine exactly what the ratings agencies would do, because what we actually spend the money on is what matters for them.
What are you saying that the administration's
John,
10-year capital
John nodded at
plan,
my interpretation, for the record.
the administration's 10-year capital plan was for about $86 million a year. So right now we're borrowing at $50 million per year, but could go up to 100 million. So it creates a window of 14 million in addition to what the capital plan is from the administration, but I don't know if any school construction is included in that 86 million. No idea. Wouldn't think so.
Anyone? Yeah, Carol.
Well, I thought about the information that you were saying about, about the elementary schools, and I thought about culture change. And I understand it can be very difficult to combine any schools, but if it's a little easier to do that kind of construction because there's less of the shared spaces that have to be built in a high school, huge gymnasium, all those things. Then I thought maybe for cultural reasons, although today it doesn't sync with what I heard today, but it might be easier to get the elementary school kids together, and then they would expect to keep going together once they get to the high school. And it might be a little easier to do that building and construction physically. And then repurposing the school buildings, super key, and that fits in with the elementary schools. And then the siting of the schools where they're needed. And really important to differentiate new versus rehab and how we're going to deal with that.
Does anyone have anything else on that rehab of non-school buildings question?
So it was an interesting conversation that they seemed was started early on. We're gonna make this into a housing, or we're gonna do this, someone said this morning, rec center or something like that. If a school district decides near the beginning that they're gonna do the following with the school, then it would seem to me that voters in the district, people in the districts understand the benefits of doing it from the get-go, rather than sort of being backed into it uncomfortably. We could.
That land bank is a very interesting idea, not only for school buildings, but also for vacant single-family dwellings, apartment dwellings, that kind of stuff. So I think that's encouraging, but they'll probably come back to us in November with a request for money to seed the land bank.
Cool.
I mean, you need to have it. You need to have money in order to get going.
I mean, I personally need to better understand how they're different from housing trusts. I see that they are, I just need like a little side by side for my brains. Carol?
I loved what you asked about selling building land for $1, because at this point, well, if you do that, there are multiple issues, and you're trying to make a community see that something could be, well, never mind. I just thought it was important.
Yeah, that came up in South Burlington when we were looking at two different projects. One was potentially consolidating all of our elementary schools. Like a decade ago, we talked about consolidating all of them and building one new one. And then what do you do with 3 properties? And partly the city wanted those properties for other things. And then the project that actually did end up coming to fruition is that one of our elementary schools land swapped, like an acre of land at that elementary school for the old city hall, so that the new city hall and library could be built like right in front of Brick Market Central School. And the argument at the time was it's the same taxpayer. So it's a little awkward, because as a school district, school board member, I was like, why should we, just hand over property to the city? And the argument was just made that, it's all the same taxpayer. So you're selling land, but I take.
I do not think it's the same taxpayer, and I feel like I'm gonna get a lot of emails yelling at me about that.
I
Like,
hear
do
you.
not think it's the same taxpayer.
And I think right now it's a lot more the same taxpayer than it is in the future state. When I know that we all have a pooled education system, but if there's a lot more sort of directive really from the state about how much you're spending each year on students, that feels to me a little bit more like school properties start to feel a little bit more like school properties as opposed to municipal properties. But I'm just saying, that's an argument that's gonna be made in a lot of different places, and it came up a lot.
I mean, so much of the testimony we've heard in the last 2 days has included folks saying like, this is the percentage of money we sent to the education fund. It's like, no, you sent all the money to the education fund. And then some of it comes back, right? But people are still like figuring out their ratios from Act 60. Yeah.
I'm thinking about childcare, and when this is a penalty boards, I'll just say, and when we made all the rules about how cold the floor could be or how warm the floor had to be and all kinds of rules, we lost a lot of childcare.
There are rules about the temperature of the floor?
It's
Where? Rules about what?
Well, we should get some new services come in and testify about this, but the thing is that when you make a lot of requirements about safety and security, if that would happen, that would necessitate changes to a building, that would necessitate conversations about how to meet those. And then you might end up with more consolidation.
Yeah, anecdotally, there are rules about, for daycare centers, on floor temperature. And anecdotally, I have heard that those are used harshly against certain providers.
Okay, that seems like a conversation for another day, but I appreciate where you were coming, I understand where you're coming from, that like more requirements might mean more costs, which could change the consolidation.
Security, definitely.
I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the excess spending threshold. The impact on
Thank you, Chair.
Colchester and other communities that have school bonds. And the current structure in our current state that is really a disincentive.
And just to add to that, I'm concerned about that also. We know now who's bonded, so we can just change that date to make it easier for ourselves now, rather than try to figure everything else out. But basically, we just going forward don't want to use construction incentives and money to incentivize a choice that is not a merged choice or something that the CSIS are trying to get to.
I think so S220 sets a lower excess spending threshold, but exempts school construction. We have not received testimony on that. We can do that next week. But I think there's sort of an interesting piece in there about whether that actually winds up increasing spending or decreasing spending, because we have one thing doing this and one thing doing this, and that'll be an interesting part of it. I think of Colchester, who in a slightly different category that I think of districts who moved a vote the following year after anyway. But that's another conversation for another day. Yeah.
I think the challenge is we have been, everything we do creates incentives and people are responding differently. I know districts that have held votes precisely because we've been talking about construction data actively for 4 years. And they said, let's not get ahead of the state. Some districts decided, even in my own district, to get ahead of the state and will not be benefiting. And so I don't think fairness is ever 100% possible, but I do think if we have policy coherence, we can start moving people slowly in the right direction. And, you know, larger, I've already had expressed my concerns, to, but I think we're potentially incentivizing or disincentivizing kinds of regional collaboration that probably need to happen if we.
Okay, thanks, everyone. See you at 1:15. 1:15.
We're exempt from solar.
We are exempt from floor.